welcome. Welcome one, welcome all to our Saturday stream. Going to be reading Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, hopefully the last couple of chapters of it. I'll begin shortly. Starting with chapter 27. I remember when this book came out, I was much younger, and my dad was reading it at the same time, and he insisted he finish it first before anyone else in the family. It was probably a good move now in hindsight, as it has what's probably one of the biggest spoilers in the series in it. I remember at the time everyone was saying, I'm sure most people know. For those who haven't, I won't say, but you remember those at the time coming out. My dad, he was a postman at the time, and he says he remembers he was going round, and he had his wee postie bag with him, and the bag was so heavy because everyone had their copies of Harry Potter, and they were wanting them obviously on the day it had come out, the day it was released. So he was going around the estates and delivering the big thick Harry Potter books to people. There hasn't been anything like that in a long time, I reckon. Any big demand for books that would mean day of release, posties are weighed down in their bags with those big thick books of Harry Potter that everyone's looking for. That's something else, this series. But I won't keep you any longer. We'll begin. Once back under the starry sky, Harry heaved Dumbledore onto the top of the nearest boulder, and then to his feet. Sodden and shivering, Dumbledore's weight still upon him, Harry concentrated harder than ever on the destination of Hogsmeade. Closing his eyes, gripping Dumbledore's arm as tightly as he could, he stepped forward into that feeling of horrible compression. He knew it had worked before he'd opened his eyes. The smell of salt, the sea breeze had gone. He had Dumbledore, and he was shivering and dripping in the middle of the dark high street in Hogsmeade. For one horrible moment, Harry's imagination showed him more inferi creeping towards him around the side of the shops. But he blinked and saw nothing was stirring. All was still, the darkness complete but for a few street lamps and lit upper windows. "We did it, Professor," Harry whispered with difficulty. He suddenly realized he had a searing stitch in his chest. "We did it. We got the Horcrux." Dumbledore staggered against him. For a moment Harry thought that his inexpert apparition had thrown Dumbledore off balance. Then he saw his face, paler and damper than ever, and a distant light of the street lamp. "Sir, are you all right?" "I've been better," said Dumbledore weakly, though the corners of his mouth twitched. That potion was no health drink. And to his horror, Dumbledore sank to the ground. "Sir, it's okay, sir. You're going to be all right. Don't worry." He looked around desperately for help, but there was nobody to be seen at all. He could only think that he must somehow get Dumbledore quickly to the hospital wing. "We need to get you up to school, sir. Madame Pomfrey—" "No," said Dumbledore. "It is Professor Snape whom I need, but I do not think I can walk very far just yet." "Right. Sir, listen. I'm going to knock on a door and find a place you can stay. Then I can run and get Madame Severus," said Dumbledore clearly. "I need Severus." "All right then, Snape. But I'm going to have to leave you for a moment so I can—" Before Harry could make a move, however, he heard running footsteps. His heart leapt. Somebody had seen. Somebody knew they needed help. And looking around, he saw Madame Rosmerta scurrying down the street towards them on high heels, high-heeled fluffy slippers, wearing a silk dressing gown embroidered with dragons. "I saw you apparate as I was pulling my bedroom curtains. Thank goodness, thank goodness. I couldn't think what's wrong with Albus?" She came to a halt, panting and staring down, wide-eyed at Dumbledore. "He's hurt," said Harry. "Madame Rosmerta, can he come into the Three Broomsticks while I go up to the school and get help for him?" "You can't go up there alone. Don't you realize? Haven't you seen?" "If you help me support him," said Harry, not listening to her, "I think we can get him inside." "What has happened?" asked Dumbledore. "Rosmerta, what's wrong?" The dark mark, Albus." and she pointed into the sky in the direction of Hogwarts. Dread flooded through Harry at those words. He turned and looked. There it was, hanging in the sky over the school, the blazing green skull with the serpent tongue, the mark Death Eaters left whenever they'd entered a building, whenever whenever there had been a murder. When did it appear? Said Dumbledore, and his hand clenched painfully upon Harry's shoulder. He struggled to his feet. Must have been minutes ago. I wasn't there. I was putting the cat out, but when I got upstairs... We need to return to the castle at once, said Dumbledore. Rosmerta, and although he staggered a little, he seemed wholly in command of the situation. We need transport. Brooms. I've got a couple behind the bar, she said, looking very frightened. Shall I run and fetch? No, Harry can do it. Harry raised his wand at once. Accio, Rosmerta's brooms. A second later, they heard a loud bang as the front door of the pub burst open. Two brooms had shot out onto the street and were racing each other to Harry's side, where they stopped dead, quivering slightly at waist height. Rosmerta, please send a message to the Ministry, said Dumbledore, as he mounted the broom nearest him. It might be that nobody within Hogwarts has yet realized anything is wrong. Harry, put on your invisibility cloak. Harry pulled his cloak out of his pocket and threw it over himself before mounting his broom. Madame Rosmerta was already tottering back towards her pub as Harry and Dumbledore kicked off from the ground and rose into the air. As they sped toward the castle, Harry glanced sideways at Dumbledore, ready to grab him should he fall. But the sight of the dark mark seemed to have acted upon Dumbledore like a stimulant. He was bent low over his broom, his eyes fixed on the mark, his long silver hair, beard flying behind him into the night air. And Harry, too, looked ahead at the skull. Fear welled up inside him like a venomous bubble, compressing his lungs, driving all other discomfort from his mind. How long had they been away? Had Ron, Hermione, and Ginny's luck run out by now? Was it one of them who had caused the mark to be set over the school? Or was it Neville, or Luna, or some of the other members of DA? What if it was... He was the only one that had told them to patrol the corridors. He had asked them to leave the safety of their beds. Would he be responsible again for the death of a friend? As they flew over the dark, twisting lane down which they had walked earlier, Harry heard over the whistling of the night air in his ears, Dumbling muttering something in a strange language again. He thought he understood why, as he felt the brooms shudder for a moment, and then they flew over the boundary of the school grounds. Dumbledore was undoing the enchantments he himself had set up around the castle, so that they could enter at speed. The dark mark was glittering directly above the astronomy tower, the highest in the castle. Does that mean the death occurred there? Dumbledore had already crossed the crenellated ramparts and was dismounting. Harry landed next to him seconds later and looked around. The ramparts were deserted. The door to the spiral staircase that led into the school castle was closed. There was no sign of a struggle, a fight to the death, of a body. What does it mean? Harry asked Dumbledore, looking up at the green skull with the serpent's tongue glittering evilly above them. Is that the real mark? Has someone definitely been... Professor? In the dim green glow of the mark, Harry saw Dumbledore clenching his chest with his blackened hand. Go wake Severus, said Dumbledore faintly, but clearly. Go tell him what has happened and bring him to me. Do nothing else. Speak to nobody else. Do not remove your cloak. I shall wait here. But you swore to obey me, Harry. Go. Harry hurried over to the door of the spiral staircase, but his hand had only closed upon the iron ring of the door when he heard running footsteps on the other side. He looked around at Dumbledore, who gestured to him to retreat. Harry backed away, drawing his wand as he did so. The door burst open and somebody erupted through it and shouted, Expelliarmus! Harry's body became instantly rigid and immobile as he felt himself fall back against the tower wall, propped like an unsteady statue, unable to move or speak. He could not understand how that had happened. Expelliarmus was not a freezing charm. Then, by the light of the mark, he saw Dumbledore's wand flying in an arc over the edge of the ramparts, and understood. Dumbledore had wordlessly immobilized Harry, and the second he had taken to perform the spell had cost him the chance of defending himself. Standing against the ramparts, very white in the face, Dumbledore still showed no sign of distress or panic. He merely looked across at his disarmer and said, "Good evening, Draco." Malfoy stepped forwards, glancing around quickly to check he and Dumbledore were alone. His eyes fell upon the second broom. "Who else is here? A question I might ask you, or are you acting alone?" Harry saw Malfoy's pale eyes shift back to Dumbledore in the greenish glare of the mark. "No," he said, "I've got backup. There are Death Eaters here in your school tonight." "Well, well," said Dumbledore, as though Malfoy was showing him an ambitious homework project. "Very good indeed. You found a way to let them in, did you?" "Yeah," said Malfoy, who was panting, "right under your nose, and you never realized." "Ingenious," said Dumbledore. "Yet, forgive me, where are they now? You seem unsupported." "They met some of your guard. They're having a fight down below. They won't be long. I came on ahead. I've got a job to do." "Well then, you must get on and do it, my dear boy," said Dumbledore softly. There was a silence. Harry stood imprisoned within his own invisible, paralyzed body, staring at the two of them, his ears straining to hear sounds of the Death Eater's distant fight. And in front of him, Draco Malfoy did nothing but stare at Albus Dumbledore, who, incredibly, smiled. "Draco, Draco, you're not a killer." "How do you know?" said Malfoy at once. He seemed to realize how childish the words had sounded. Harry saw him flush in the mark's greenish light. "You don't know what I'm capable of," said Malfoy, more forcefully. "You don't know what I've done." "Oh, yes, I do," said Dumbledore mildly. "You almost killed Katy Bell and Ronald Weasley. You have been trying, with increasing desperation, to kill me all year. Forgive me, Draco, but they have been feeble attempts. So feeble, to be honest. I wonder whether your heart had really been in it." "It has been in it," said Malfoy vehemently. "I've been working on it all year and tonight." Somewhere in the depths of the castle below, Harry heard a muffled yell. Malfoy stiffened and glanced over his shoulder. "Somebody's putting up a good fight," said Dumbledore conversationally. "But you were saying—" "Yes, you managed to introduce Death Eaters into my school, which, I admit, I had thought impossible. How did you do it?" But Malfoy said nothing. He was still listening to whatever was happening below, and seemed almost as paralyzed as Harry was. "Perhaps you ought to go on and get the job done alone," suggested Dumbledore. "What if your backup has been thwarted by my guard? As you have perhaps realized, there are members of the Order of the Phoenix here tonight too, and, after all, you really don't need help. I have no wand at the moment. I cannot defend myself." Malfoy merely stared at him. "I see," said Dumbledore kindly, when Malfoy neither moved nor spoke. "You're afraid to act until they join you." "I'm not afraid," snarled Malfoy, although he made no move to hurt Dumbledore. "It's you who should be scared." "But why? I don't think you'll kill me, Draco." "Killing is not nearly as easy as the innocent believe. So tell me, while we wait here for your friends, how did you manage to smuggle them in here? It seems like you've taken a long time to work out how to do it." Malfoy looked as though he'd been fighting down the urge to shout or vomit. He gulped and took several deep breaths, glaring at Dumbledore. His wand pointed directly at the latter's heart. Then, as if he could not help himself, he said, "I had to mend the broken vanishing cabinet that no one's used for years, that one Montague got lost in last year." "Ah!" Dumbledore's sigh was half a groan. He closed his eyes for a moment. "That was clever. There was a pair, I take it." "The other one's in Borgin and Burke's," said Malfoy, "and they make a kind of passage between them. Montague's told me that whenever he was stuck in the Hogwarts one, he was trapped in limbo, but sometimes he could hear what was going on at school, and sometimes he could hear what was going on at the shop." as if the cabinet was travelling between them, but he couldn't make anyone hear him. In the end, he managed to apparate out, even though he'd never passed his test. He nearly died doing it. Everyone thought it was a really good story, but I was the only one who realised what it meant. Even Morgan didn't know. I was the only one who realised there could be a way into Hogwarts through the cabinets if I fixed the broken one. Very good, muttered Dumbledore. So the Death Eaters were able to pass from Borgin and Burke's into the school to help you. A clever plan, a very clever plan, and, as you say, right under my nose. Yeah, said Malfoy, who, bizarrely, seemed to draw courage and comfort from Dumbledore's praise. Yeah, it was. But there were times, Dumbledore went on, weren't there, when you were not sure that you would succeed in mending the cabinet? Had you resorted to crude and badly judged measures, such as sending me the cursed necklace that was bound to reach the wrong hands, poisoned mead that was only the slightest chance I might drink? Yeah, well, you said you didn't realize who was behind that stuff, didn't you? Sneered Malfoy as Dumbledore slid a little more down the ramparts, the strength in his legs apparently fading. Harry struggled fruitlessly, mutely, against the enchantment binding him. As a matter of fact, I did, said Dumbledore. I was sure it was you. Why didn't you stop me then? Malfoy demanded. I tried, Draco. Professor Snape has been keeping watch over you on my orders. He hasn't been doing your orders. He promised my mother. Of course, that is what he would tell you, Draco, but he's a double agent, you stupid old man. He isn't working for you. You just think he is. We must agree to differ on that, Draco. It so happens that I trust Professor Snape. Well, you're losing your grip then, sneered Malfoy. He's been offering me plenty of help, wanting all the glory for himself, wanting a little bit of action. What are you doing? Did you do the necklace? That was stupid. It could have blown everything. But I haven't told him what I've been doing in the Room of Requirement. He's going to wake up tomorrow, and it'll all be over, and he won't be the Dark Lord's favourite anymore. He'll be nothing compared to me. Nothing. Very gratifying, said Dumbledore mildly. We all like appreciation in our own hard work, of course, but you must have had an accomplice, all the same. Someone in Hogsmeade, someone who was able to slip Katie that... Ah... Dumbledore closed his eyes again and nodded, as though he was about to fall asleep. Of course, Rosmerta. How long has she been under the Imperator's curse? Got there at last, have you? Malfoy taunted. There was another yell from below, rather louder than the last. Malfoy looked nervously over his shoulder again, then back at Dumbledore, who went on. So poor Rosmerta was forced to lurk in her own bathroom and pass that necklace to any Hogwarts student who entered the room unaccompanied. And the poisoned mead, well, naturally, Rosmerta was able to get the poison in it for you before she sent the bottle to Slughorn, believing that it was to be my Christmas present. Yes, very neat, very neat. Poor Mr. Filch could not, of course, think to check a bottle of Rosmerta's. Tell me, how have you been communicating with Rosmerta? I thought we had all methods of communication in and out of the school monitored. Enchanted coins, said Malfoy, as though he was compelled to keep talking, though his wand was shaking badly. I had one and she had the other, and I could send her messages. Isn't that the secret method of communication the group that called themselves Dumbledore's Army used last year? Asked Dumbledore. His voice was light and conversational, but Harry saw him slip an inch lower down the wall as he said it. I got the idea from them, said Malfoy with a twisted smile. I got the idea of poisoning the maid from the Mudblood Granger as well. I heard her talking in the library about Filch not recognising potions. Please do not use that offensive word in front of me, said Dumbledore. Malfoy gave a harsh laugh. You care about me saying mudblood when I'm about to kill you? Yes, I do, said Dumbledore, and Harry saw his feet slide a little on the floor as he struggled to remain upright. But as for being about to kill me, Draco, you have you've had several long minutes now. We are quite alone. I am more defenseless than you could have ever dreamed of finding me, and you still have not acted. Malfoy's mouth contorted involuntarily, as he thought he tasted something bitter, as though he had tasted something bitter. Now about tonight, Dumbledore went on, I'm a little puzzled about how it happened. You knew that I had left the school, but of course, he answered his own question, Rosmerta saw me leaving. She tipped you off using those ingenious coins, I am sure. That's right, said Malfoy, but she said you were just going for a drink. You'd be back. Well, certainly I did have a drink, and I came back, after a fashion, mumbled Dumbledore. So you decided to spring a trap for me. We decided to put the dark mark over the tower and get you to hurry up to here to see who's been killed, said Malfoy, and it worked. Well, yes and no, said Dumbledore. But am I to take it then that nobody has been murdered? Someone's dead, said Malfoy. His voice seemed to go up an octave as he said it. One of your people. I don't know who it was. It was very dark. I stepped over the body. I was supposed to be waiting up here until you got back, only your phoenix lock got in the way. Yes, they do that, said Dumbledore. There was a bang and shouts from below, louder than ever. It sounded as though people were fighting up the actual spiral staircase that led up to where Dumbledore, Malfoy, and Harry stood. Harry's heart thundered, unheard in the invisible chest. Someone was dead. Malfoy had stepped over the body. But who was it? There is a little time, one way or another, said Dumbledore, so let us discuss your options, Draco. My options, said Malfoy loudly. I'm standing here with a wand. I'm about to kill you. My dear boy, let us have no more pretense about that. If you were going to kill me, you would have done it. Done it when you first disarmed me. You would not have stopped for this pleasant chat about ways and means. I haven't got any options, said Malfoy. He was suddenly as white as Dumbledore. I've got to do it. He'll kill me. He'll kill my whole family. I appreciate you're in a difficult position, said Dumbledore. Why else do you think I've not confronted you about it until now? Because I knew that you would have been murdered if Lord Voldemort had realized I suspected you. Malfoy winced at the sound of the name. I did not dare speak to you of the mission with which I knew you had been entrusted, in case he used legitimacy against you, continued Dumbledore. But now at last we can speak plainly to one another. No harm has been done. You've hurt nobody, although you're very lucky that your unintended victims survive. I can help you, Draco. No, you can't, said Malfoy, his wand shaking very badly now. Nobody can. He told me to do it, or he'll kill me. I have no choice. Come over to the right side, Draco. We can hide you more completely than you can ever imagine. What is more, I can send members of the Order to your mother and hide her likewise. Your father is safe at the moment in Azkaban. When the time comes, we can protect him too. Come over to the right side, Draco. You are not a killer. Malfoy stared at Dumbledore. But I got this far, didn't I? He said slowly. They thought I'd die in the attempt, but I'm here, and you're in my power, and I'm the one with the wand. You're at my mercy. No, Draco, said Dumbledore quietly. It is my mercy, and not yours, that matters now. Malfoy did not speak. His mouth was open, his wand hand still trembling. Harry thought he'd drop it by a fraction, but suddenly footsteps were thundering up the stairs, and a second later Malfoy was buffeted out of the way as four people in black robes burst through the door onto the ramparts. Still paralyzed, his eyes unblinking, Harry gazed in terror upon four strangers. It seems the Death Eaters had won the fight below. A lumpy-looking man with a lopsided leer gave a wheezy giggle. Dumbledore cornered, he said, and he turned to a stocky little woman who looked as though she could be his sister, who was grinning eagerly. Dumbledore, wandless, Dumbledore alone. Well done, Draco, well done. Good evening, Amicus, said Dumbledore calmly, as though welcoming the man to a tea party. And you brought Alecto too. Charming. The woman gave an angry little titter. Think your little jokes will help you out of your deathbed then? She jeered. Jokes? No, no, these are manners, replied Dumbledore. Do it, said a stranger standing nearest to Harry, a big, rangy man with matted hair and whiskers, whose black Death Eater robes looked uncomfortably tight. He had a voice like none Harry had ever heard, a rasping bark for a voice. Harry could smell a powerful mixture of dirt, sweat, and, unmistakably, blood coming from him. His filthy hands had long, yellowish nails. Is that you, Fenrir? Said Dumbledore. That's right, rasped the other. Pleased to see me, Dumbledore. No, I cannot say I am. Fenrir Greyback grinned, showing pointed teeth. Blood trickled down his chin, and he licked his lips slowly, obscenely. But you know how much I love little kids, Dumbledore. Am I to take it that you're attacking, even without the full moon now? That is most unusual. You have developed a taste for human flesh that cannot be satisfied once a month. That's right, said Greyback. Shocks you that, does it, Dumbledore? Frightens you? Well, I cannot pretend it does not disgust me a little, said Dumbledore. And yes, I am a little shocked that Draco here invited you, of all people, into a school where his friends live. I didn't, breathed Malfoy. He was not looking at Greyback. He did not seem to even want to glance at him. I didn't know he was going to come. I wouldn't miss a trip to Hogwarts, Dumbledore, rasped Greyback. Not when there are throats to be ripped out. Delicious, delicious. He raised a yellow fingernail and picked the front of his teeth, leering at Dumbledore. I could do you for afters, Dumbledore. No, said the fourth Death Eater sharply. He had a heavy, brutal-looking face. We've got orders. Draco's got to do it. Now, Draco, and quickly. Malfoy was showing less resolution than ever. He looked terrified as he stared into Dumbledore's face, which was even paler and rather lower than usual. He'd slid so far down the rampart wall. He's not long for this world anyway, if you ask me, said the lopsided man, to the accompaniment of his sister's wheezing giggles. Look at him. What's happened to you then, Dumby? Oh, weaker resistance, slower reflexes, Amicus, said Dumbledore. Old age, in short. One day, perhaps, it will happen to you, if you're lucky. What's that mean, then? What's that mean? Yelled the Death Eater, suddenly violent. Always the same, weren't you, Dumby? Talking and doing nothing. Nothing. I don't even know why the Dark Lord bothered killing you. Come on, Draco, do it. But at that moment, there were renewed sounds of scuffling from below, and a voice shouted, They've blocked the stairs! Reducto! Reducto! Harry's heart leapt. So these four had not eliminated all opposition, but had merely broken through the fight to the top of the tower and, by the sound of it, created a barrier behind them. Now, Draco, quickly, said the brutal-faced man angrily. But Malfoy's hand was shaking so badly that he couldn't barely aim. I'll do it, snarled Greyback, moving back toward Dumbledore, his hands outstretched, his teeth bared. I said no, shouted the brutal-faced man. There was a flash of light, and the werewolves blasted out of the way. He hit the ramparts and staggered, looking furious. Harry's heart was hammering so hard, it seemed impossible that nobody could hear him standing there. Imprisoned by Dumbledore's spell, if he could only move, he could aim a curse from under the cloak. Draco, do it, or stand aside so one of us, screeched the woman, but at that precise moment the door to the ramparts burst open, and once more there stood Snape, his wand clutched in his hand. His black eyes swept the scene, from Dumbledore, slumped to the wall, to the four Death Eaters, including the enraged werewolf and Malfoy. We've got a problem, Snape, said Lumpy Amicus, whose eyes and wand were fixed upon Dumbledore. The boy doesn't seem able. But somebody else had spoken Snape's name quite softly. Severus. The sound frightened Harry beyond anything he'd ever experienced. For the first time, Dumbledore was pleading. Snape said nothing, but walked forward and pushed Malfoy roughly out of the way. The three Death Eaters fell back without a word. Even the werewolf seemed cowed. Snape gazed for a moment at Dumbledore, and there was revulsion and hatred etched in the harsh lines of his face. "Severus, please." Snape raised his wand, pointed it directly at Dumbledore. "Avada Kedavra." A jet of green light shot from the end of Snape's wand and hit Dumbledore squarely in the chest. Harry's scream of horror never left him, silent and unmoving. He was forced to watch as Dumbledore was blasted into the air. For a split second, he seemed to hang, suspended, beneath the shining skull, and then he fell slowly backwards, like a great rag doll, over the battlements and out of sight. Well, that was chapter 27. That was dramatic, wasn't it? I remember the first time I read that. Couldn't believe he'd died. I was not expecting him to die. Suppose that set me up for the 7th book, didn't it? Quite a number of them. It's funny, she foreshadowed it a little bit as well in the 5th book, if you remember. That photograph, I think it was only in the book. I don't remember it being in the movie. Maybe it was, but Harry had found a picture of the Old Order, and he's talking to Snape, not Snape, talking to his godfather, Sirius, about it. And he's looking around all the faces, and he's worried how many are dead now. And he's saying, "That's crazy." And his godfather's trying to console him. He's like, "Oh no, different times. They were whatever 2-1 picking us off. That won't happen this time." And yet, the next 2 books say otherwise, don't they? I have spilled water, quite a bit of it, down myself. Oh, that's not a good feeling. Look at Nimbus, his wee nose tucked into the corner. Well, we won't take a break. How many chapters is that? 3. That's quite a bit. See what we can get through. If not, we'll finish it another time, but I'll try to get through it. Flight of the Prince, this is called. Harry felt as though he too were hurtling through space. It had not happened. It could not have happened. "Out of here, quickly," said Snape. He seized Malfoy by the scruff of the neck and forced him through the door ahead of the rest. Greyback and the squat brother and sister followed, the latter both panting excitedly as they vanished through the door. Harry realized he could move again. What was now holding him paralyzed against the wall was not magic, but horror and shock. He threw the invisibility cloak aside as the brutal-faced Death Eater, last to leave the top of the tower, was disappearing through the door. Petrificus totalis. The Death Eater buckled as though he was hit in the back with something solid and fell to the ground, rigid as waxwork. But he'd barely hit the floor when Harry was clambering over him and running down the darkened staircase. Terror tore through Harry's heart. He had to get to Dumbledore, and he had to catch Snape. Somehow the two things were linked. He could reverse what had happened if he had them both together. Dumbledore could not have died. He leapt the last 10 steps of the spiral staircase and stopped where he landed, his wand raised. The dimly lit corridor was full of dust. Half the ceiling seemed to have fallen in the midst of a raging battle before him. But even as he attempted to make out who was fighting whom, he heard the hated voice shout, "It's over, time to go." He saw Snape disappearing around the corner, the far end of the corridor, and Malfoy seemed to have forced their way through the fight unscathed. As Harry plunged after them, one of the fighters detached themselves from the fray and flew at him. It was the werewolf Greyback. He was on top of Harry before Harry could even raise his wand. Harry fell backwards, the filthy, matted hair in his face, the stench of sweat and blood filling his nose and mouth, the hot, greedy breath at his throat. Petrificus totalis! Harry felt Greyback collapse against him. With a stupendous effort, he pushed the werewolf off and got on to the floor, as the jet of green light came flying towards him. He ducked and ran headfirst into the fight. He, his feet met something vaguely squashy and slippery on the floor, and he slipped. There were two bodies lying there, face down in a pool of blood, but there was no time to investigate. Harry now saw red hair flying like flames in front of him. Ginny was locked in combat with one of the lumpy Death Eaters, Amicus, who was throwing her hex after hex at her, which she dodged. Amicus was giggling, enjoying the sport. Crucio, Crucio, you can't dance forever, pretty. Impedimenta, yelled Harry. His jinx hit Amicus in the chest. She gave a pig-like squeal of pain, was lifted to her feet, and slammed into the opposite wall. She slid down it and fell out of sight behind Ron, Professor McGonagall, and Lupin, each of whom was battling a separate Death Eater. Beyond them, Harry saw Tonks fighting an enormous blonde wizard who was sending curses flying in all directions so that they ricocheted off the walls around them, cracking stone, shattering the nearest window. Harry, where did you come from? Ginny cried, but there was no time to answer. He put his head down and sprinted forward, narrowly avoiding a blast that erupted over his head, showering them with bits of wall. Snape must not escape. We must catch Professor Snape. Take that, shouted Professor McGonagall, and Harry glimpsed a female Death Eater, Alecto, sprinting away down the corridor with her arms over her head, her brother right behind her. Harry launched himself after them, but his foot caught on something, and the next moment he was lying across someone's legs. Looking around, he saw Neville's pale, round, flat face against the floor. Neville, are you... All right, muttered Neville, who was clutching his stomach. Harry, Snape and Malfoy ran past. I know I'm on it, said Harry, aiming a hex from the floor at the enormous blonde Death Eater, who was causing most of the chaos. The man gave a howl of pain as the spell hit him in the face. He wheeled around, staggering away, then pounded after the brother and sister. Harry scrambled up from the floor and began to sprint along the corridor, ignoring the bangs issuing from behind them, and the yells of the others to come back, and the mute call of the figures from the ground whose fate he did not yet know. He skidded around the corner, his trainers slippery with blood. Snape had an immense head start. It was possible that he'd already entered the cabinet in the Room of Requirement, or that the Order had made steps to secure it, to prevent the Death Eaters from retreating that way. Harry could hear nothing but his own pounding feet, his own hammering heart, as he sprinted along the empty corridor, but then spotted a bloody footprint, which showed that at least one of the Death Eaters was heading towards the front doors. Perhaps the Room of Requirement was indeed blocked. He skidded around another corner as a curse flew past him and dived behind a suit of armour which exploded. He saw the brother and sister Death Eaters running down the marble staircase ahead and aimed jinxes at them, but merely hit several bewigged witches in portraits on the landing, who ran screeching into neighbouring paintings. As he leapt over the wreckage of the armour, Harry heard more shouts and screams of other people in the castle who seemed to have awoken. He pelted towards the shortcut, hoping to overtake the brother and sister and close in on Snape and Malfoy, who must surely have reached the grounds by now. Remembering to leap the vanishing step halfway down the concealed staircase, he burst through a tapestry at the bottom and out into the corridor, where a number of bewildered and pyjama-clad Hufflepuffs stood. Harry, we heard some noise, said someone. Something about the dark mark, began Ernie Macmillan. Out of the way, yelled Harry, knocking two boys aside as he sprinted towards the landing and down the remainder of the marble staircase. The oak doors had been blasted open. There were smears of blood on the flagstones, and several terrified students stood huddled against the walls, one or two still cowering, with their arms over their faces. The giant Gryffindor hourglass had been hit by a curse, and the rubies within were still falling with a loud rattle onto the flagstones below. Harry flew across the entrance hall and out into the dark grounds. He could make out three figures racing across the lawn, heading for the gates beyond, in which they could disapparate. By the looks of them, the huge blonde Death Eater, and, some way away of him, Snape and Malfoy. The cold night air ripped at Harry's lungs as he tore after them. He saw a flash of light in the distance that momentarily silhouetted his quarry. He did not know what it was, but continued to run, not yet near enough to get a good aim, with a curse. Another flash, shouts, retaliatory jets of light, and Harry understood. Hagrid had emerged from his cabin and was trying to stop the Death Eaters escaping. And though every breath seemed to shred his lungs and the stitch in his chest was like fire, Harry sped up as an unbidden voice in his head said, "Not Hagrid, not Hagrid too." Something caught Harry hard in the small of the back, and he fell forwards, face smacking the ground, blood pouring out of his nostrils. He knew, even as he rolled over, his wand ready, that the brother and sister he had overtaken using his shortcut were closing in behind him. "Impedimenta!" he yelled, and rolled over again, crouching close to the dark ground, and, miraculously, his jinx hit one of them, who stumbled and fell, tripping up the other. Harry leapt to his feet, sprinted on after Snape. And now he saw the vast outline of Hagrid, illuminated by the light of the crescent moon, revealed suddenly from behind the clouds. The blonde Death Eater was aiming curse after curse at the gamekeeper, but Hagrid's immense strength and his toughened skin that he had inherited from his giantess mother seemed to be protecting him. Snape and Malfoy, however, were still running. They would soon be beyond the gates, able to disapparate. Harry tore past Hagrid, and his opponent took aim at Snape's back and yelled, "Stupefy!" He missed. The red jet of light soared past Snape's head. Snape shouted, "Run, Draco!" and turned 20 yards apart. He and Harry looked at each other, raising their wands simultaneously. Curse! But Snape parried the curse, blocking Harry. He knocked him backwards off his feet before he could complete it. Harry rolled over and scrambled back up again as the huge Death Eater behind him yelled, "Incendio!" Harry heard an explosive bang, and a dancing orange light spilled over them. Hagrid's house was on fire. "Hang Fang's in there, you evil!" Hagrid bellowed. "Curse!" yelled Harry, for the first time aiming for the figure ahead, illuminated in the dancing firelight. But Snape blocked the spell again. Harry could see him sneering. "No unforgivable curses from you, Potter," he shouted over the rushing of flames. Hagrid's yells and the wild yelping of the trapped Fang. "You haven't got the nerve or the ability." "In cart!" Harry roared, but Snape deflected the spell again with almost a lazy flick of his arm. "Fight back!" Harry screamed at him. "Fight back, you cowardly—" "Coward, did you call me, Potter?" shouted Snape. "Your father would never attack me unless it was 4-on-1. What would you call him, I wonder?" Blocked again, and again, and again. "Until you learn to keep your mouth shut and your mind closed, Potter," sneered Snape, deflecting the curse once more. "Now come," he shouted at the huge Death Eater behind Harry. "It's time to be gone before the Ministry turns up." Impediment. Before he could finish his jinx, excruciating pain hit Harry. He kneeled over in the grass. Someone was screaming. He would surely die of this agony. Snape was going to torture him to death or madness. "No!" roared Snape's voice, and the pain stopped suddenly as he stared. Harry lay curled on the grass, clutching his wand and panting. Somewhere from above him, Snape was shouting, "Have you forgotten your orders? Potter belongs to the Dark Lord. We are to leave him. Go, go!" And Harry felt the ground shudder under his feet as brother and sister and the enormous Death Eater obeyed, running towards the gates. Harry uttered an inarticulate yell of rage. In that instant, he neither cared whether he lived or died. Pushing himself to his feet again, he staggered blindly towards Snape, the man he now hated as much as he hated Voldemort himself. Sectum! Snape flicked his wand, and the curse was repelled yet again. But Harry was mere feet away now, and he could see Snape's face clearly at last. He was no longer sneering or jeering. The blaze of flames showed his face full of rage. Mustering all his powers of concentration, Harry thought, "No, Potter!" screamed Snape. There was a loud bang, and Harry was soaring backwards, hitting the ground hard again, and this time his wand flew out of his hand. He could hear Hagrid yelling and Fang howling as Snape closed in and looked down on him from where he lay, wandless and defenceless, as Dumbledore had been. Snape's pale face, illuminated by the flaming cabin, was suffused with hatred, just as it had been before he cursed Dumbledore. "You dare use my own spells against me, Potter? It was I who invented them. I, the half-blood prince. And you'd turn my inventions on me, like your filthy father, would you? I don't think so. No." Harry dived for his wand. Snape shot a hex at it, and it flew feet away into the darkness, out of sight. "Kill me then," panted Harry, who felt no fear at all, but only rage and contempt. "Kill me like you killed him, you coward." "Don't!" screamed Snape, and his face suddenly demented, inhuman, as though he was in as much pain as the yelling, howling dog stuck in the burning house behind them. "Call me a coward!" He was slashing at the air. Harry felt a white-hot, whip-like something hit him in the face, and he was slammed back towards the ground. Spots of light burst in front of his eyes. For a moment all of his breath seemed to have gone from his body. Then he heard the rush of wings above him. Something enormous obscured the stars. Buckbeak had flown at Snape, who was staggering backwards as the razor-sharp claws slashed at him. As Harry raised himself into a sitting position, his head still swimming from the last contact with the ground, he saw Snape running as hard as he could, the enormous beast flapping behind him and screeching as Harry had never heard him screech. Harry struggled to his feet, looking around groggily for his wand, hoping to give chase again, but even as his fingers fumbled in the grass, discarded twigs, he knew he would now be too late. And sure enough, by the time he had located his wand, he turned only to see the hippogriff circling the gates. Snape had managed to disapparate just beyond the school's boundaries. "Hagrid," muttered Harry, still dazed, looking around. "Hagrid!" He stumbled around the burning house as an enormous figure emerged from the flames, carrying Fang on his back. With a cry of thankfulness, Harry sank to his knees. He was shaking in every limb, his body ached all over, and his breath came in painful stabs. "You all right, Harry? You all right? Speak to me, Harry." Hagrid's huge, hairy face was swimming above Harry, blocking the stars. Harry could smell burnt wood and dog hair. He put out a hand and felt Fang's reassuringly warm and alive body quivering beside him. "I'm all right," panted Harry. "Are you?" "Course I am. Take more than that to finish me." Hagrid put his hands under Harry's arms and raised him up with such a force that Harry's feet momentarily left the ground, before Hagrid sat him upright again. He could see blood trickling down Hagrid's cheek from a deep cut under one eye, which was swelling rapidly. "We should put out your house," said Harry. "The charm's Aguamente." "Knew it was somewhat like that," mumbled Hagrid, and he raised his smouldering pink flowery umbrella and said, "Aguamente." A jet of water flew out of the umbrella tip. Harry raised his wand arm, which felt like lead, and muttered, "Aguamente." 2. Together he and Hagrid poured water on the house until the last flame was extinguished. "It's not too bad," said Hagrid hopefully a few minutes later, looking at the smouldering wreck. "Nothing Dumbledore won't be able to put right." Harry felt a searing pain in his stomach at the sound of the name, and in the silence and stillness, horror rose inside him. "Hagrid, I was binding up a couple of bowtruckle legs when I heard him coming," said Hagrid sadly, still staring at his wrecked cavern. "They'd been burnt to twigs, poor little things. Hagrid, but what happened, Harry?" "I saw them Death Eaters running down out of the castle. What the ruddy hell was Snape doing with them? Where's he gone? Was he chasing him? He..." Harry cleared his throat. It was dry from panic and smoke. "Hagrid, he killed..." "Killed?" said Hagrid loudly, staring down at Harry. "Snape killed? What are you on about, Harry?" "Dumbledore," said Harry. "Snape killed Dumbledore." Hagrid simply looked at him. The little of his face that he could see was completely blank, uncomprehending. Dumbledore. What, Harry? He's dead. Snape killed him. Don't say that, said Hagrid roughly. Snape killed Dumbledore? Don't be stupid, Harry. What's made you say that? I saw it happen. You couldn't have. I saw it, Hagrid. Hagrid shook his head. His expression was disbelieving but sympathetic, and Harry knew that Hagrid thought he had sustained a blow to the head, that he was confused, perhaps, by the after effects of a jinx. What must have happened was, Dumbledore must have told Snape to go with them Death Eaters, Hagrid said confidently. I suppose he's got to keep his cover. Look, I know, let's get you back up to the school. Come on, Harry. Harry did not attempt to explain or argue. He was still shaking uncontrollably. Hagrid would find out soon enough, too soon. As they directed their steps back toward the castle, Harry saw that many of the windows were lit now. He could imagine clearly the scenes inside, as people moved from room to room, telling each other that Death Eaters had gotten in, and the mark was shining over Hogwarts, that someone must have been killed. The oak front door stood open ahead of them, light flooding out onto the lawn. Slowly, uncertainly, dressing-gowned people were creeping down the steps, looking around nervously for some sign of the Death Eaters who had fled into the night. Harry's eyes, however, were fixed upon the ground at the foot of the tallest tower. He imagined that he could see a black, huddled mass lying in the grass there, though he was really too far away to see anything of the sort, even as he stared wordlessly at the place where he thought Dumbledore's body must lie. However, he saw people beginning to move towards it. What are they all looking at? Said Hagrid, as he and Harry approached the castle front, Fang keeping as close as he could to their ankles. What's that lying on the grass? Hagrid added sharply, heading now towards the foot of the astronomy tower, where a large crowd was congregating. See it, Harry, right in front of the foot of the tower, under where the mark. Blimey, you don't think someone got thrown? Hagrid fell silent, the thought apparently too horrible to express aloud. Harry walked alongside him, feeling the aches and pains in his face and legs with the various hexes in the last half an hour had hit him, though in an oddly detached way, as though someone near him was suffering them. What was real and inescapable was the awful pressing feeling in his chest. He and Hagrid moved, dreamlike, through the muttering crowd to the very front, where the dumbstruck students and the teachers had left a gap. Harry heard Hagrid's moan of pain and shock, but did not stop. He walked slowly forwards until he reached the place where Dumbledore lay, and crouched down beside him. Harry had known that there was no hope the moment that the body-bound curse Dumbledore had placed upon him had lifted, known that it could only have happened because its caster was dead. But there was still no preparation for him seeing him there, spread-eagled, broken. The greatest wizard Harry had ever or would ever meet. Dumbledore's eyes were closed, but for the strange angle of his arms and legs, he could have been sleeping. Harry reached out, straightened the half-moon spectacles upon the crooked nose, and wiped the trickle of blood from the corner of his own sleeve. He gazed down at the wise old face and tried to absorb the enormous and incomprehensible truth that he would never again speak to Dumbledore. Never again could he help. The crowd murmured behind Harry. After what seemed like a long time, he became aware that he was kneeling upon something hard and looked down. The locket they had managed to steal so many hours before had fallen out of Dumbledore's pocket. It had opened, perhaps due to the force of which he had hit the ground, and although he could not feel any more shock or horror or sadness than he already felt, Harry knew as he picked it up that there was something wrong. He turned the locket over in his hands. This was neither as large as the locket he remembered seeing in the Pensieve, nor was there any markings upon it, no sign of the ornate S that was supposed to be Slytherin's mark. Moreover, there was nothing inside but for a scrap of folded parchment wedged tightly into place where the portrait should have been. Automatically, without thinking about what he was doing, Harry pulled out the fragment of parchment, opened it, and read it by the light of the many wands that had now been lit behind him. To the Dark Lord, I know I will be dead long before you read this, but I want you to know that it was I who discovered your secret. I have stolen the real Horcrux and intend to destroy it as soon as I can. I face death in the hope that when you meet your match, you will be mortal once more. R.A.B. Harry neither knew nor cared what the message meant. Only one thing mattered. This was not a Horcrux. Dumbledore had weakened himself by drinking the terrible potion for nothing. Harry crumpled the parchment in his hand, his eyes burned with tears, as behind him Fang began to howl. End of chapter 28. We have 2 more chapters. I don't know if I'm up for it. I've been going for an hour now, and my voice, it still could use a bit of training. Oh, big Bowie, look at him. Our sleeping mascot. Lovely. Lovely. Well, I'll get this up on YouTube. Thanks again for listening. Have a great weekend, and I'll see you soon.